welcome to Coding After Work stream. Before we bring in our guest today, we would like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. The first one is Progress Telerik. Telerik supports the developer community with example sponsoring streams like these. And they also make amazing Blazor components. In the latest release, they have more than 65 truly native components. And this makes them, again, the largest Blazor component suite on the market.
And the other one is 1337 or 1337, a knowledge-driven consultancy company that specializes in innovative, custom-built software solutions. Thank you so much for helping us do things like this.
But now, let's bring in our guest, our good friend, Richard Campbell.
And my mouse is sticking. There we go.
Hi, guys.
Theme of these couple of days. Yeah. How are you?
I'm fine. Was it a year ago we were together?
Pretty
Almost
much
to
on
the
the
day.
day.
Yeah. For
I think
your
it was
event.
for Jimmy's birthday last year, which is tomorrow.
Yeah, I came from NDC London over to Stockholm and got a few days to spend together. It seems a lot longer ago than that.
Yeah. We ran into our luggage the other day and we were like, I remember this, but I don't know why.
What do you do with these?
Yeah, my bags are so neatly packed away at the moment. It's strange. And I dismantled my travel toiletry kit because it's just sitting there. I might as well take it apart, like clean it out. So I don't know when that ends. It's still a ways away.
Yeah.
Interesting times, to say the least.
Absolutely. Yeah, no question. But we've all gotten better at this stuff. No two ways about that.
That's true.
That is true. We're learning something.
Yeah.
So what have you been up to during this pandemic?
Well, I do an in-person conference, right? Dev Intersection. So winding that down was challenging. Lots of legal agreements and managing folks' expectations and trying to find a way forward. So we've been experimenting with all of that. The podcasts are busier than ever. I mean, the demand for podcasts, I think people ran out of Netflix content by like April.
Yeah.
And so there was a little dip in listenership for a little while because nobody was commuting. And then it just started going up. There was just a demand for content. And I've done a lot of COVID-related shows on Run As. I did a separate show a week from May till December, specifically oriented on what IT folks should be thinking during the pandemic. There was been a lot of pressure put on IT folks these past year. And so it was great to sort of bring in experts and focus on the different pieces, like how, you shipped everybody home. How did you help them lock down? What can you help them with their Wi-Fi? What needs to go across the VPN? What can move to the cloud? Big expansion in virtual desktop work, stuff like that. So, turned out you can make like 35 shows on those problems. So there you go. Who knew?
At least. Yeah. Who knew?
Well, it got to a point by the end of the year where I couldn't tell the difference between what was a show about managing the pandemic and what was just IT. They're kind of the same thing now, right? This is sort of the new normal. Like now I'm talking to folks, they're closing offices or they're completely redesigning them. They're building hot desking areas, collaboration spaces where people can still sit safely apart, but designed for a team of 6 to work for a day in. And different teams use it every day. So where they might have had offices or cubicles for 36 people, now they have this working space for 7 people, and it's changing and it's used by different people each day. And so they've releasing some office space. They're redesigning space. It's been very interesting to see how different organizations are coping and changing, sort of acknowledging work from home probably not going to stop.
What do you think about like 2022, 23 is working from home? Is that the new normal?
I think so. I think a lot of folks are going to try going back to work and then start remembering the parts they dislike. We always end up with sort of fairy tale memories of things. And then when you go and try them again, you're like, oh yeah, that's why that sucked. Okay. I've been telling the line, I've been using the line, I've been jet lagged since 2001. It may not have been a joke. After 3 months at home, which would have been the longest stretch I'd been at home in 20 years, my sleep changed. I used the Fitbit, and it's got the little sleep rating thing, and those numbers shifted upward after a few months of being home. And when I saw those numbers, I'm like, uh-oh. Because that's one of those things where it's like, eventually when you get to travel again, those numbers are going to go back down, and you're going to know the difference.
And it's going to hit you even worse.
Well, yeah. And then you're going to just remember, hey, I know what sleeping well is like now. So maybe I'm not prepared to give that up. So I don't think we go back. I think things are permanently different. They're not going to be the way they are right now. There's going to be a new balance. I don't know what it is. I'm interested. I'm excited about it. And our abilities to cope with the state of infrastructure as it is super interesting.
Yeah, and we see a lot of people in I was going to say near us, but we haven't seen anybody in forever. But people we know, friends.
We don't even know how people look like.
No, exactly. But they are actually working even more than before because they have that 1 hour commute they don't have to do in the morning. Well, but they're still up at the same time.
I talked to some managers who are concerned at overwork and actually cutting hours, like saying, hey, like we're working too much. Like this isn't good either. Productivity is pretty high as people build out their spaces. It's not same for everyone. Certainly the contact I have mostly with a lot of IT folks through RunAs, they talking about the fact that, hey, I've got a group of employees, they're still in the roommate phase of their lives. And it's like, look, I really can't work from home. I do not have an office. I'm not going to have an office. I need a place to go. And same for, folks living in a small place with little kids. Like it's impossible to focus. There's nowhere to do a chat from. And so it depends on who and where you are. I'm certainly in a place where I can do that. I have a nice office to myself and, in a pretty peaceful household, except for a somewhat smelly old dog. We're good.
He's pretty peaceful though.
He is. It's been a hard year for him. Now you guys have met Zach, and but he turned 16 in January.
Wow.
I mean, I'm in some ways I'm grateful that I was home this past year because this has been the year that the age started really hitting him, and so a lot more medicine, a lot of trips to the vet. His hair is still growing back on his belly from an ultrasound. There was concerns about tumors. But he's faded a bit. And he's got that old dog smell now. No two ways about it.
Yeah. He's a cutie pie, though.
He's a great little dog. And he can't do stairs anymore. We got a ramp on the back deck so he can come up the ramp. But I carry him up and down the stairs, up the stairs.
Yeah.
He'll come down into the basement. And he's quite used to it. He deliberately just stands in front of me. He's like, yeah, it's time to pick me up. Carry me up.
Oh,
yeah.
I got to think if I had done the travel year that I had planned for 2020, which even for me was extreme, it was like an over, 200,000 mile year. I suspect at some point, Stacy would have been calling saying, you need to come home and help with the dog because this is getting hard. And
I mean, it's precious time.
Yeah, it is. And again, I'm rather grateful to be able to work with him through this. And I don't know how much longer we got. This winter, in October, I didn't think he'd make it through the winter. But the latest round of tests and some new meds, and he sort of bounced back. So he's pretty perky now. And when he can't go upstairs, he'll still walk, a half a mile or a kilometer or so. And then he's tired, but he wants to go out. And he never misses a meal, which is a real metric for a dog. When the dog doesn't want to eat, then something's wrong. But he'll always eat.
Yeah, you have to give him some air scratches from us.
Oh, for sure. You know, he likes the scooches. No two ways about that. He's way more affectionate in his old age now too. He will lay on the sofa beside Stacy and for a whole show, not just a few minutes, but like an hour. and before he comes in and snugs under my desk for the evening. So yeah, it's funny how that old age is just because he's always kind of a standoffish dog, kind of a serious personality, but not as much these days.
So Matthias says that he has been cutting minutes from meetings, hour to 30 minutes, 30 minutes to 15. How do you do that, Matthias?
Yeah.
I want to do that too.
Me too.
It's funny. I think one of the things that's happened is people are doing so many meetings now that I'm seeing more people insisting on agendas. I was in one loop where it's like, hey, can we have an agenda for this meeting? And they put together the agenda, and then one of the people who's looped in is like, if we just agree to this, this, and this, do we still need this meeting? And they're like, no, if everybody's good with that, let's just call it good. It's like, hey, one less meeting. That was a good day. But
that's true.
Yeah. I think we're all getting screen burned, which is amazing considering what we do for a living. And actually needing to how do we shorten these things? How do we optimize them and spend a little less time? I think the Zoom cocktail thing was fun in the spring last year, Northern Hemisphere. But if you were a manager who was on one kind of stream or another the whole day, the one thing you weren't going to do at night was be on another screen. Although I've definitely found like using the iPad upstairs for a cocktail hour is very different from being, down here with the lights and the cameras and things. So at least you can break up the environment. And I'm hoping when the weather gets nicer in the springtime, given that we're still somewhat restricted, there'll be more deck time too. Set up the rig out there.
Yeah, that would be nice. We still have, I don't know, too much snow.
Yeah, it's true. How did you guys do New Year's?
At home.
Yeah.
We went out on the balcony. And that's what we did.
Made some noise. We did a streamed, or not a stream, but like a video call with some friends and celebrate together. But I went a little nuts with the rig and set up a 2-camera shoot so that Stacy could demonstrate making cocktails as well. So it's like, all right, we're switching over to the cocktail cam now.
Maybe we should do that next year.
Yeah.
Or this year.
We did get to drink that champagne we got as a gift once. Yeah. It's been waiting.
And I recognize your shirt there, Jess. That's from your visit to British Columbia, right? That's Haida art. That's what, the hummingbird and the frog?
I think it's 2 hummingbirds.
Or it's 2 hummingbirds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I love it. We also got the coasters and stuff like that, and that's really
using them every day.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, the Haida art style is very distinct. It's one of my favorites too. It's,
mine too.
Part of that whole area, and where we were staying up on the coast, there is this what they call the Seashell Nation, First Nations, and that's where totem poles are from. Right? These you've always heard about them, and it's sort of this is literally the part of the world where they make them, and still do to this day. They're rare, but they still exist.
Yeah, and it was fascinating to see how they were built at the museum and how big they are. They're huge. Some of them, at least.
It's the big cedars. It kind of makes sense that it's an interesting statement about that culture before Europeans arrived was wealthy enough that they spent their time harvesting these massive trees, meters in diameter, and then making art from them. Not weapons, not tools, not wealth per se, but art, symbology. It's what wealthy nations do. And they were, for their era, remarkably successful.
So what you might be hearing in the background is we're taking care of a couple of cats for our friend. So, and apparently he just woke up.
Yeah, if we're not focusing on him,
Yeah.
there will be noise.
Yeah. Demanding cat. Well, Zach is never that. The only way Zach makes noise most of the time is he shakes his collar very deliberately. Like, I'm right here. Yeah. And one of his collar shakes snuck into one of the ads I did on Run As. And somebody mentioned it on Twitter, and I'm like, oh, no, yeah, I guess I better reshoot that. And they're like, no, your dog's at the end of his life. That's kind of a precious thing. You should keep that ad. I'm like, okay, I can do that. That's funny. But yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah, if it's live, it's live.
It is what it is, right? Well, one way or the other.
Yeah.
Well, where do you guys want to go? What do you want to talk about today?
Yeah, what would we want to talk about?
I've heard that you have some stories.
I always have
researching your book.
Still, I just got another interview, and I have 2 more coming after.
I think that will be a whole set of books.
I'm doing my very best, to not, because it can spin wildly out of control. So I definitely created buckets for certain content. The book I'm working on right now, I would call it a political history. How various people made decisions about the technologies that result in this story arc around really the transformation of Microsoft. That's what's interesting to me about what I've learned in these several years of research on how .NET was created and evolved, is that it's actually a story of how Microsoft evolved. .NET started out as a product really for enterprise developers to build software for Windows, desktop software as well. Like, the web was still relatively new when they were doing the planning for .NET, right? They'd been digging around for a solution to enterprise class development in the middle 90s. And of course, they implemented their own version of Java, because generally speaking, Microsoft doesn't invent languages. They implement other people's languages. They have their own implementation of C++. They had several implementations of BASIC. And so when Java came along in the 90s, they said, well, there's a language we can implement, and they did. And then they ran afoul of their agreement with Sun. Although some would argue that that was always a kind of a foolish agreement. They were, it's like the day they signed it, both parties were in conflict over it. And so, and Microsoft made a wildly successful version of Java. I mean, it wasn't around for very long, but it was intensely popular. And so logically, what they were doing was optimizing their implementation of Java for Windows. And if you think about their doing that in 1998, which is NT4, Windows 98 era, they're already wildly dominated as a desktop operating system in the average business. Like that's the majority of desktops at that time. And it would only get more so over the next few years. And so logically, those optimizations made, if you wrote in their version of Java, it ran great on Windows, better on Windows, better and better and better, until you got to a point where the mission of Java, which was this one language, every platform, they were in conflict with it because their version of Java didn't run particularly well on other operating systems, hadn't been optimized the same way. And they were starting to add extensions to it that were Windows specific. They really wanted to create a good COM interop layer for obvious reasons. And it's interesting that other folks would ultimately do that as well. But that leads to, in 98, the breakdown and ultimately a legal agreement to say cease and desist, you can't have Java anymore. And that Anders Hallsberg was hired into Microsoft to work on Java tooling. That's where he came from. He came from Borland to Microsoft to work on that Java tooling, and suddenly they couldn't work on Java anymore. And they needed an object-oriented, memory-managed language. So, the end of Java really was the stimulus for C#. Those two things kind of go together. And so, but it all started with this focus on enterprise development. and then the world changed. I would argue .NET delivered on its original mission, what it intended to do, which would be an effective enterprise class development tool set in 2005. By version 2, they're kind of there. They had a web development approach that was good for internal development, a little more challenging for external development. And they had an excellent client, server, or even end-tier architected, object-oriented, garbage-collected development platform. Beautiful. But even by then, how important was the operating system? Like the operating system's significance was rapidly diminishing. Everybody needed one, but which one? It was not important. And so the focus on Windows actually was a part of the struggle for Microsoft for the longest time. And of course, the dev tool guys were recognizing that. That's why you saw tools like Silverlight emerge and need to run on the Mac and ultimately on Linux as well. Like they were diversifying the platforms by 2008, 2009 against the will of the powerhouse of Microsoft, which was Windows. So, but it was sort of an indicator that the operating system is becoming less important. And it gets to its darkest days by Windows 8, which doesn't go particularly well. And they're still trying to work on a lingua franca, and at that time really arguing in favor of JavaScript. But the Microsoft you see today was kind of transformed by, let's not focus on Windows. We can focus on the cloud, and we can work with every operating system. And .NET transformed itself. So, part of my thesis for this book ultimately is that the evolution of .NET painted examples for Microsoft itself to become the cross-platform open source company that is today.
That's kind of interesting to see it that way.
And the reason I've come to that is that I have specific stories that are like moments in time that are sort of indicators of this change of the company. That's like, no, we want to go this way. Like it makes more. This is the thing, and they make a bet. They said they commit to this moment. Like there's an argument as to what was the moment when Microsoft committed to the cloud. Like they created their own cloud. Until we're talking about it in 2008 and 2009. But when did they really commit to the cloud? And I would argue, and I have this story in a few different fashions, that in 2013 there was a meeting, and it was really a fallout meeting for the failure of Windows 8. That Windows 8 had not been adopted in the levels that they'd expected. And it was the Office team that was pushing, because the Office team had already built a version of Office that ran on iOS and Android, because they wanted to compete with Google Docs, which worked on all the platforms. And so, but that product hadn't been released. It had been held on the shelves for some time. And so there was this meeting where they're talking about, Windows is going to make its numbers, and we're going to have to do this and do that and so forth. And the Office team is like, hey, well, we can pick up some slack here if we can get out our iOS and Android version. The Windows team was against it. And ultimately they agreed, yeah, we're going to do this. And so Windows took a back seat to the cross-platform story. And when that message was communicated to the company, it was like a lightning bolt. It's not something I think we saw significantly out in the world, but internally, from the stories that I've gathered, it was such a big deal for a senior leadership meeting to come out and say, no, Windows will take a back seat now. We need to support these other platforms. That's more important. That's a sea change. That's the shift in the company. And then it only really manifests for us another year or two later, when most people look at, and I've done this as a talk of when open source came to Microsoft, right? The build event in 2014 was sort of the time that they sort of rolled out. Satch now the CEO, and Anders Halsberg pushes the button to deploy Rosalind onto GitHub, and it's going to be cross-platform and open source. Like that is the culmination of the event of the evolution of Microsoft, but it seems like the launching point for most folks. So I think the book is an opportunity to sort of tell you how they get to that moment and how that moment continues to evolve.
I think for many people, still Microsoft is the closed company, not contributing to open source and stuff like that. I still meet people that when I tell them, well, Microsoft is the biggest open source contributor in the world, they go, what? They are? It's still...
If you look at
Can't
it from a
believe it's
GitHub
true.
perspective, right? Like
True.
SourceForge is still SourceForge. Like there's other parts of open source community out there, but it's certainly in the GitHub world. They just moved a tremendous amount of work, and it's been a story arc that we've been dealing with on .NET Rocks. Is what is the consequences of this software wants to be free kind of open source movement that was all of us coding after work, to coin a term, when tech giants paying full-time employees to work in that space show up. Right? So suddenly these open source projects are not your passion projects. They're the thing you do because you're not going to go bowling. You're going to work on this. They're your job. It's 40 hours plus a week, right? Your salary is based on it. That is a non-trivial shift in how software is developed in the open source community. And I think we're still grappling with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how do you compete to that if you are just that person who's coding after work?
Well, yeah, you know, and we've had a couple of shows in this area that we sort of danced around that point. It's like, hey, you had a labor of love project. You've gotten it to a certain point. People really like it, and it sort of pops up on a Microsoft or a Google radar as this is important to us. And even if they just had one full-time person now paying attention to you, that person is going to generate more code and more PRs, more energy than you can possibly cope with. Heaven help you if there's more than one. And, you know, so you could argue, well, they're trying to do the right thing and support an existing project. And clearly they have opinions about where they need to go based on what their customers need and what they need, which may or may not be what you want to go. And if you don't play ball, well, they can just fork it and make their own version, right? Or start from scratch and write something else and overwhelm you.
Yeah.
I don't know what's right or wrong. Like there's an energy here of it's good to build things. But I think we're also seeing these companies drape themselves in the laurels of open source and free, and then using it to bully.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's something I certainly pay attention to as someone in a position to collect and share those stories and to sort of explore this and have that conversation. And it's challenging too. You know, we're talking about my friends, like folks I've known for years and years that work at Microsoft, and they're in that situation. And so I get to have that conversation with them often, usually in private. You know, sometimes we can make a show, but sometimes we can't. So, you know, how did we get here? Like what happened here? And it's, you know, people generally speaking, people are trying to do the right thing. But just because you're an elephant doesn't mean you know you're an elephant. And sometimes you can't tell what you stepped on, right? It's hard to be careful enough and to even acknowledge the weight that you're coming to the table with. Just the power of I get to work on this every day, right?
Yeah.
Let's see if we can bring in some questions. Interesting with a company like Microsoft, there's always been a political lag between tech and sales and customers, where different parts are ahead or behind, and sometimes left behind. But also, if you wait long enough, things might become fashion again, like click ones.
Well, I mean, I guess I could run with the click once thing all by itself, just because, I mean, how unfashionable has client-side software been the past few years? And for, you know, I've spent enough time with the enterprise architect hat on to just go, look, you're going to have a tough time convincing me that a client-side app makes sense. That, you know, tell me why it shouldn't be a web app, where I know I don't have to worry about version updates. We update the server, everybody's got the new version, right? I don't have to worry about deployment pain, security pain, right? I mean, I also live in the IT world where I talk to guys like Sammy Leho, just scare the snot out of me with these hijack strategies. These black hats now get into someone's machine, but because they're locked down enough that the user's account is not sufficiently privileged, what it does is actually lays a Trojan that waits for an update to come in, which has to elevate privileges to install the update, and hijacks that process. So my update process is now a security risk. Right? Thanks, Sammy. I was sleeping at night for a while there, but these are the things now we confronted with client-side software. It's like, why is this the correct answer? Where the browser already represents a security context that exists and is safe. So let's just put our software out through the browser context. And of course, there's arguments.
Go
ahead, buddy.
I do have the answer why we're not doing web instead of client side. JavaScript. That's why.
That's locally you, though.
Yeah, well, it's not only, Jimmy. Like, there's a lot of folks that...
It's locally half the developers.
But and then there's, so we've got one fix in the form of TypeScript. It's like, okay, well, let's add some static typing around this dynamic language. And then we have the other fix, which is WASM, and let you write in C# and Rust with its own set of problems. Nothing's that easy. It is. I don't know if you've been paying attention to this, but Microsoft is getting serious about Rust. They brought some Rust-line people in-house. Like even their own languages, this diversity is growing. They care about the spectrum. How do you want to code? What do you want to code in? But yeah, I'm totally with you. And to Matthias's point about click once is a strategy for trying to relieve that deployment pain. And but you also got to make sure, are we bringing something to the table that's wildly valuable, right? Is there something to that client that's important? It's getting harder to understand the value prop when we see how well the web's doing, how robust the browser is these days. I'm waiting for a disruption, honestly. I think the augmented reality stuff opens the door to a whole new level of client interface. It's not going to be web in your goggles. It's going to be something more sophisticated than that, especially at the beginning. Your HTML, JavaScript, CSS approach to rendering is typically a laggard to technology. We had more innovative things in WinForms long before we had them in HTML.
But what do you think about, VR, AR, it was huge when the HoloLens came out. Then it kind of, a lot of companies went out of business, and the HoloLens 2 came out. And, well, it kind of feels like the industry is dying before it's even took off.
Yeah, this is the Gartner hype cycle, right? Which is, you have this hype up that's inevitable, and then you fall into the trough of disillusionment, which is when you find out, hey, it's actually hard and it doesn't do everything, and you're going to have to do the work. So, HoloLens 2 is doing extremely well in specific verticals, right? In specific industries. And what's important in those verticals? They can't be in a cubicle. They need to be able to move around. They're collecting as much visual data as text data. They're not sensitive to price. The fact that they're throwing $3,000 things onto people that they're likely to break it shouldn't be a significant factor. And so I look at the demonstration that Pratt & Whitney did around maintaining jet turbine engines. So this is a technician, an expensive technician, a heavily trained technician in a relatively rough environment. And engine maintenance facility is not a trivial place to hang out in. But they're working on something that's stunningly expensive. Every one of those engines is, several $1 million, right? You look at the $120 million price tag on a 737, it's split three ways. Each engine and the fuselage are all roughly the same price, right? Each one of those engines represents like $30 million. Take care with it. And so the technician is wearing the augmented reality. He's still looking at the engine, but he's got a smart checklist. A checklist is actually identifying what part of the engine he's looking at, telling him where he should look, where the borescope sight is, and so forth, and then seeing him do it before he shows him the next step so that he has to do each step correctly. And when he sees a crack in a spot where he's not quite sure what to do, he requests support from a specialist, and that specialist in a different location puts on another pair of goggles and sees through his glasses, literally looks at the same thing he's looking at, gives him some information, and they'd make decisions on what to do in the maintenance of that engine. And not only was that a very cool workflow, like an effective utilization of a set of skills, but they also have detailed video documentation of every step of maintenance done on the engine. So they did a better quality maintenance in less time with better record keeping. So if there are issues later, they can go back and study them. It's suddenly the price of that infrastructure, not that big a deal. Like, it makes a lot of sense. It's a vastly better way to do the work. And so I look at augmented reality right now, and I totally detach virtual reality from that. It's annoying to me to even say them together because they're completely different products, right?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. I look at it as in the BlackBerry phase right now. So in the late 90s, when BlackBerry really took off, it took off in large enterprises because you had to have a custom exchange infrastructure to operate it. So it took full-time people and a bucket load of money, and they were $1,000 phones before Steve Jobs told you it was cool to own a $1,000 phone. and so only specific verticals afforded them. It didn't make sense.
Yeah.
It wasn't for consumers, right? And so I think that's where we are right now, and we're waiting for what the consumer device will be. And BlackBerry devices eventually became consumer. They just weren't really good consumer devices. You know, the mistakes that existed in the BlackBerry are not that different from where they are in Holland's right now, which is a lot of custom development, not built for general purpose use. Like, it's a very different architecture to actually get to the general purpose device that these things could be. It's just going to take some time and some more evolving and more money. And so it helps that it's starting to make money in those particular spaces. So you can take it forward, it can mature it enough that then maybe we will find the iPhone of augmented reality.
Find the iPhone of augmented reality.
Yeah, I think a brand has succeeded when you use the term like that.
Yeah, well, the way I always look at it is it an iPhone or a Newton, right? Because they were both made by Apple 10 years apart, right? The Newton's from 1997, and they sold 50,000 of them over 5 years total, right? So, you know, just because you're Apple doesn't mean everything's perfect, right? The Newton was ahead of its time, and the customer base wasn't prepared for the work it was. They came to the smartphone market late, but they came with a definitive design, right? The slab of black glass. Before the iPhone, smartphones were fun, right? Some had keyboards, some had antennas, some had attachments, right? After the iPhone, they're all slabs of black glass. Like, the smartphone kind of ended at that point. Now it's just, do you have one camera or two cameras or three cameras? Is it 4 inches across or 5 inches across or 6 inches across? Or how are you holding that? What pocket does it fit in, right? But it's all the same. They're kind of boring, right? It's just the same thing over and over again, which is why I think it's ripe for disruption. Like, they're kind of out of good ideas for phones, right? You just keep polishing the same thing over and over again. So it's time for
now
what comes next.
Now we can fold them.
Someday, once or twice, then you need a warranty replacement.
Yeah, and I don't like it. No, there's this line in between, and it's offset by like half a pixel.
Yeah.
No.
Oh no. And certain personalities really have a problem when things aren't quite straight, now, don't they?
Yeah.
But also
maybe.
the operating system sort of tweaked out. The touch interface is as good as it's going to get. Like, we're kind of run all of the options down. But the main thing the smartphone has done is propagated around the world, right? Essentially, every adult human now has a tether attached to them, allows them to communicate with almost anyone else anywhere in the world, and to have access to a huge source of information. I'm not going to say facts, because there's plenty of things out there that are not facts. But we're all cyborgs, right? We all have digital extensions to ourselves.
Yeah.
We just keep them outside of our body because A, and B, slows down upgrades. But you watch people's reaction to misplacing their phone. It's clearly a limb, like it's an extension of yourself.
That is so true.
Isn't that kind of interesting? Because
now we've gotten to that point where we look at it that way. we're ready for innovation in that space. We all want a digital extension of ourselves. Can we have a better one, please?
I remember a time when you could go out from your house, didn't have a phone, didn't have a problem.
Yeah.
But now if you forget your phone, you go, what? My phone.
What if someone's calling? Wait, I don't use my phone for calls.
I can't even go to the restroom without my phone.
No. Well, and also every phone call starts now with, where are you? Back in the old days when the phone rang and you answered, I knew where you were because you answered. But yeah, not so much anymore.
True.
Yeah, it's not, it doesn't, we don't think that way, but it's also, we can't imagine not having an essentially on-demand connection, which, I mean, that starts with another aspect of the culture change that we're dealing with. And I think it's been really important during the pandemic, which is that attention is valuable. And there's an etiquette. Asking for someone's attention is asking a lot.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about what does a ringing phone actually say to the person, you know, experiencing it. I don't care what you're doing right now. What I want from you is more important. Stop what you're doing and pay attention to me right now.
Yeah.
And the answer, of course, is that's never true. That's never true. If the phone rings in my presence right now and I don't have it on my schedule, I'm not answering it because I'm never going to be happy with what happens. Every time I do answer it, I'm sad because it was not more important than what I was doing. Right?
Yeah, and you lose your train of thought.
Yeah, no, flow is expensive. And just the etiquette piece of, and you think about what we do instinctually now to establish a synchronous communication. You start with an asynchronous communication, right? You send an instant message or, you know, some form of non-interrupting asynchronous communication, asking permission for attention.
People, take notes.
But even that much attention is pricey. Like, you wouldn't send 10 of those to someone. Right? That's rude. Even though it's asynchronous and non-interrupting, it's still rude because each one still needs to be read. It's still some attention. It's the least amount of attention you can take, but it's still some attention. And if we're respectful people, we're careful with that. Your attention is precious. I will take as little of as possible and I'll ask for more. And you have the choice to say yes or no.
I still get emails. Can you call me? Yes,
No.
I know how. Mostly I know how. But I know that you can email me.
Yeah. I guess that's a good answer. It's like, can you email me?
Yeah. So Stacey says, when I passed my driving test in 94, I'd drive hundreds of miles. No phone, no navigation. I wouldn't do it today.
I use navigation. What? It's 1.5 kilometers from here.
I cleaned out
navigation.
But I do it for the traffic information, right? Saying, and Stacey always teases me about that, right? I pull up the phone and I plug in. It's like, you don't know where we're going? And it's like, yeah, I know where we're going, but this has traffic data. Now, look, it doesn't want us to go down the regular route. It's clearly a problem on the bridge. Let's go the other way. I cleaned out an old laptop bag because I've been home too long. You know, closets have been opened that haven't been opened in a long time. And I found printed maps for like a consulting shop place I was going, like for some consulting gig. And I remember doing that. You know, part of your prep before you left was you printed out, all right, here's the path from the hotel to the to the hotel. Here's the path from the hotel to the office, right? Here's a couple of restaurants I want to check out. This stack of paper I stick in my bag. You killed a lot of trees back then, man.
Yeah.
And today you just ask by voice and the car will get you there.
Yeah, don't really have to make a plan anymore.
Well, apparently not with us two, because we have not. Well, you know that we can't even find our way back from our own backyard, which is literally 6 meters. So yeah.
When Richard was here in Stockholm, well, a year ago, we had to follow him to get back to the hotel because we had no idea where we were going. Yeah. Oh, it's this way. Are you sure?
And we live here.
How do you know?
Because he has a sense of direction and we
Yeah.
don't.
I have no
think
idea what that is.
I'm not from there, and I'm paying close attention to where I am.
The only way I can find my way around is when we are in the US.
Mhm.
Because the streets are numbers, and I do way better with numbers than I do names and directions and west and east and whatever. I mean, I know technically where it is, but if I'm turned around, I have no clue.
This is
Just give
the
me a
problem
number
with
and I'm
Stockholm is humans have lived there too long, and it's entirely
Yes.
too organic, right? And it's
Yeah.
not a straight line to be found in that whole city. It's not how they do things.
No.
there.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah,
I
like
think-
the US, it's straight lines. And
Yeah,
I can find my
Manhattan's
way
fun
around.
for that in New York because the southernmost part is the really old part that's been, that humans have been on for hundreds of years, not a straight line to be found. And then once you get up to about 34th Street, it's the grid all the way up.
Yeah.
You can see,
Yeah.
urban planning took over now.
So we have another question. Richard, what piqued your interest during the forced stay at home? Do you have any new hobbies?
Cleaning out his wardrobe.
Well, there's that. And certainly with the daughters moving out, both my daughters moved out in 2020. And so there was a bunch of stuff being shuffled around. I have actually gotten smitten with home automation. Now, I've always had home automation in my house since we bought this place in 2000, renovated in 2003, rebuilt it in 2009. I like fancy lighting, so I have good scene controlling. Like I've always had a lot of those things. But this past year, I purged the last of the X10 equipment out of the house.
Oh, that
Remember that stuff?
old stuff.
That is old stuff.
So this
We
the thing
had
is,
that 20 years ago,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
me too. But
They were expensive.
they were. I literally have boxes of it now that I've gathered up. I think I'm just going to put a note on Craigslist and go, "Are you still using X10? I'm sorry. Take this box." But yeah, I found Home Assistant. Now listen, I have to warn you, okay? You know when you find a technology you like so much that you keep telling people about it to the point where they're like, "Please don't talk to me about that anymore."
Are you going to cost me money again?
This is Home Assistant. Home Assistant, you can always tell when someone is into Home Assistant because they'll tell you. and it's got that, it's like an open source project. It happens to be open source too, by the way. But it's like that open source project that in the evenings you go downstairs and continue to tinker with it. You will never stop tinkering with your house once you insert Home Assistant into the equation. And I'm not saying that is a bad thing now, but the trick is, of course, making automations that Stacy likes. That is not a trivial thing. So, little things like that the bathroom fans turn themselves off after a half an hour. Good one, right? If you forget to turn the lights off in the garage lights turn themselves off after 15 minutes if nobody comes and goes. Right? So I'm actually monitoring all the door sensors. So if the door is open to close and it leaves the lights on, but if everything's closed up and nothing's happened for 15 minutes, then shut those lights off. The one she liked the most right now is you can walk into the kitchen and ask Google to turn on the news, and it will set the screen, switch to the switcher, change the channel, turn on the Sonos audio, like boop, 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 boop. Okay, she's like, that's a good one. Like, and making a master off button that on your way to bed you can hit a button and all the different lights turn off. So
Yeah.
I'm tinkering now with a tracker for Zach because Zach can't hear anymore. For the most part, you can't really call him, and he never came anyway. He's a Cairn Terrier. So I got a tile for him, and I'm going to start putting some little Bluetooth beacons in the different rooms. So you literally just have this Zach. What room is Zach in right now? And I'm thinking I might put a couple in the backyard as well. So if he is thinking about straying, which he doesn't do very often anymore, but happens occasionally, at least I'll have an indication, did he head up or down? And I can go fetch him as necessary. So I'm telling you, I may not have done you a favor by telling you about Home Assistant, but it's just one of those things.
What are you using instead of X10?
So the nice thing about Home Assistant is that it's an integrator. So you're not dependent on any given technology anymore. You can mix and match. So I was using Lida Lear Compose PLC going back to literally to 2003, which was an X10 based scene lighting system. And it's they stopped selling that stuff in 2010. So, I mean, I've been using what really stimulated this is those smart switches do fail over time. And I was starting to run out of them. And then we had a flood in the basement in 2015. And, fortunately, I'm married to a woman whom you two have met, whose reaction to a flood in the basement was to pull out the plans and go, so what renovations did you want to do? and so we largely gutted the basement as we made a settlement with the insurance company, which was a certain amount of money. And then we spent some more. And the big thing I did in the basement was I switched over to DC lighting. So all LED, low voltage lighting that looks like conventional lighting. The technology is called Lumen Cache. I'm super happy with it. So is she. She's very happy with it. But the byproduct was it spat out a bunch more Compose PLC switches, so I could keep the upstairs running for longer. Well, even in 2019, we were starting to run it. So I was starting to realize I was taking rooms and going, okay, I'm going to switch to conventional switches in this room because we don't use the scene stuff much to keep the scene stuff running. But finally, it's like, listen, we're out of switches. I got to upgrade. And I went Lutron Casita Pro for the upgrade. And then you sort of been vaguely aware of stuff like Home Assistant, but I also had a little smart things. I had some drape controllers, and then it's like, all right, we got Google over here, you got smart things over there, you've got Lutron over here. Like, how do you glue all this stuff together? And by the fall this year, Home Assistant, which has been going on for years, largely European too, by the way, had sort of hit a tipping point where there's enough people working on it, and enough diversity, and enough scales of solutions. So it's like, here's a bunch of easy automations, here's a bunch of harder automations. But once companies like Lutron are putting the Home Assistant logo on the box, alongside Alexa and Google and IFTTT, you're like, okay, this it's made it. And then sure enough, I sit down, watch a YouTube video, I set up a VM, do a couple configurations. All right, there goes several months. Right, I just enjoying myself too. It's a little bit of Python, a lot of YAML, some workflow tooling. I dipped into a little C coding for programming in ESP32 directly. Like it's been fantastic, and making integrations that you like features that make sense that are not too unreliable, and little things like the hood fan on the stove. We still had a manual switch on it, and it was a broken switch too. So it's like, I have to replace that switch anyway. But what if? And I added a gizmo called a Shelly dimmer. So took the hood fan apart, put the Shelly dimmer in, rewired it, replaced the switch. There's the button. You push the button, the light turns on. You push the button again, the light turns off. Press and hold the button, it'll dim. But also now it's part of the kitchen scene. So when you walk in and say, turn on the kitchen light, the hood fan turns off. And more important, on your way to bed, when you turn off all the lights, you don't go, I forgot the hood fan, and have to go back across the room, turn it off. It just turns off with everything else. That got a Stacy approval too. She's like, okay, you can stay. And then she said, did you do the fan as well? And I'm like, no. You want me to do the fan? She goes, no, I only turn it on when I'm there. So that's what I was thinking. That's why I didn't do the fan.
Are you okay with me dismantling the kitchen fan?
Yes.
You all heard her.
Yeah.
I'm
Ping
okay
me, buddy.
that.
I'll walk you through. As long as you do it live stream so we can see you get electrocuted. Excellent.
I will at least film it.
Yeah. No, that's gold, man. Gold. So,
yeah, because we have one of each. Literally one of each. We have Xiaomi, we have smart things, all the things you would mention, basically. When we were having our alarm system installed, there was this gentleman coming over here, and he's like, yeah, I'm just going to open your utility closet and I will put this upstairs, because we had too many receivers and hubs, and we couldn't even close the damn thing.
We had the Philips Hue, we had IKEA, we had Smart Things, we had Teldas, Xiaomi. Well, that's about all of them, I think. Yeah.
So yeah,
Probably
when
a few
you
more.
start getting into Home Assistant, you can sort of walk through and go, all right, do those blinds still make sense associated with smart things? Then I use the smart things interface in the Home Assistant, or can I actually directly control them? And so I was actually able to retire a couple of hubs out of the house and simplify, because I was able to control them, directly with IP or through a given gateway. So that was
because you can try to put them together. Smart things can handle some of them, and the Hue Bridge can figure out some of them. But then, and then we're still stuck with a handful of them.
And you still get into there's the company battle too. Google wants everything flowing through Google and makes it very hard for anything to not flow through Google. And Philips is not that much better. They're kind of the same thing, right? They've got their friendlies and non-friendlies. Home Assistant is an open source project, and they are doing their best to make everything work. Google is resisting Home Assistant. You can set up an app flow to be able to control Google devices like Nest thermostats and things through it, but you're required to re-authenticate on a periodic basis. Like, they're being quite unpleasant about it, and we still have workarounds. So and the good news is a bunch of really smart people that are trying to make this a unifying force. The other aspect that I didn't think much of when I started down the Home Assistant path, which admittedly was only a few months ago, than today, is that there's a sort of a mantra inside of Home Assistant about you don't need to depend on the cloud, right? One of the things they do with every one of their integrations, they mark very clearly, like, is this local event driven? Is this local polling? Is this cloud polling? Is this cloud event driven? So that you know what the demands are for your firewalls and so forth. And so, now you have a choice when you're looking at a particular implementation, saying, how am I going to do this? It's like, you can pick, you want the local event driven solution, right? It's bandwidth efficient. It doesn't depend on external resources. And so it affects your choices over time. And I've had more problems with the cloud stuff than the stuff that's local. So bit by bit, I'm scraping away some cloud dependencies into a more sustainable operation inside the house. And I check my house configuration code into GitHub.
That's good.
It's a private repository, but it's like, I like the fact that I'm writing commits on my alterations so that I can revert when I need to. Right? If I'm going to do an experiment, I'm going to dismantle this thing. I really like that I can use all my alarm sensors as just sensors. And I had an early strategy that worked, but I wasn't wildly happy with it. And I found a new strategy, a new device. And so I got the new device and I plugged it in. And then I'm like, the two systems were arguing with each other. And so I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a branch. That's right. I'm branching my house. And in that branch, I disabled all the old stuff and I enabled the new stuff. And then I merged my house and the old stuff is gone.
We had a power outage a couple of years ago, we started to flipping the
switches.
The breakers?
What are they called? The breakers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the switches.
These ones. The universal breaker. Fine. So we ended up switching the breakers, waiting for the internet to come back. Then we could turn on the lights.
That's the important part, always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I have no night vision at all, so Jimmy had to do everything, basically.
And you're the one with the driver's license.
I am. But I do have driver's glasses, which will actually help with that. So they're this yellow tinted stuff. Awesome. They're amazing. All of a sudden, I can see in the dark. Well,
nice.
Not like you, because you're a bat, but still.
And yet he doesn't have the driver's license.
Mm-hmm. Unless we get a Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. Okay.
He's threatening. He's threatening. If we are not getting a Tesla, he's not getting a driver's license.
No Tesla, personal driver.
I'm okay with that. If I get to choose a car, I'm okay with that.
I'm paying attention. We're doing this on February 2nd. I'm paying attention also to SpaceX's SN9 Starship test, which apparently is now going through propellant loading. So they may fly today.
They may fly today.
It's the countdown is still showing a half an hour, which is always a lie, but we'll see.
And they have tried for a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, they have been hacking away at it and ran afoul of the FAA on some stuff, which is interesting. Did you see the SN8 flight at the end of the year?
No, I don't believe we did.
So, no.
So this is Elon Musk's dream of building a 100% reusable rocket, right? I mean, he's already been recovering first stages with Falcon 9 on it. One of them is now, one of those boosters has flown 8 times, which is just amazing. They figured they could get maybe 10 out of it. He's getting close to that number. But the upper stage, of course, is expended, right? Nothing of that comes back. It's just moving too fast. It's too hard to recover. So Falcon 9 is kind of tapped out. Like, it's gone as far as it can go as a rocket. It's carrying pretty much as much payload as it can. The limitation is largely the width of the rocket. A Falcon 9 is 3.7 meters wide. And there's a concept in rocketry called the fineness ratio. And that basically is how many times taller is your rocket than it's wide. And a safe fineness is typically around 15 to 1. And the Falcon 9 is now at 18 to 1. So it is really long for its width, to the point where structurally it's hard to keep it rigid. It would, and generally folding is not a feature you look for in a rocket. So for SpaceX to expand the capability of the rocket, they would need to make a larger rocket, a bigger rocket, a heavy lift rocket. And this is what Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' company, actually doing a rocket called New Glenn, which is about a 7-meter rocket. But Elon is crazy. And so instead of just making a bigger rocket that could clearly do more, he kind of went for it. And he said, I want to make a completely reusable rocket. So a 2-stage rocket where the booster does what the Falcon 9 booster does, gets to a certain point, and then turns around, flies back and lands. And then the upper stage is almost like the shuttle in some respects, except it's completely self-contained, can fly the rest of the way to orbit, and then deorbit, re-enter, and land.
That's amazing.
It sounds impossible because by most methods it is. Like this, what? How? Now so first thing is it needs to be big enough. So this is a 9-meter in diameter rocket. Now that doesn't make it the biggest rocket ever. The Saturn V's first stage was 10 meters. The N1, the Soviet moon rocket, was even bigger than that. But it is very big. But the hard part is the Starship, the upper stage, needs to do multiple things. It needs to finish flying into space. It needs to do work in space. And then it needs to fly back, survive re-entry, and land. But the only engines it has on it are the ones on the end, right? And generally speaking, the rules of rocketry are the pointy end should be up and the flamey end should be down. Generally, if you're not in that orientation, something's gone wrong. So the experiments they're doing right now they've built sort of prototype starships. They're only the minimum necessary to figure out, can we actually fly a rocket up, and not even to orbit, but just up and then bring it back down again. The tests that they ran on SN8 and basically the eighth version of Starship, which was in December last year, it flew to 12 kilometers high, so 40,000 feet or so, and then shut off its engines and flew belly first, so on its side with little flaperons front and back to control itself to fly back towards a landing site, where it then would relight the engines, tip itself pointy end up, because pointy end up is good, flamey end down, flare, and land. And it almost worked. They got to the point, you can see this on YouTube, they got to the point where they did the flip maneuver. They kicked the vehicle just to get it over the pad, and then the engines failed. There was a problem with tank pressure. And so they landed with vigor. It was, relatively speaking, as explosions go, a pretty gentle one, right? There were big pieces left. This did not blow a hole in the ground. It's not a big crater. It landed hard, broke up, and exploded. So they were close, really close. This SN9, this is the next one. He actually has he's got an assembly line of these things. Like it's not like one precious prototype. He's cranking them out. I mean, at this particular moment, while they're doing their prep work, there's actually 2 out there. There's an SN9 and SN10 are assembled and out on the pads. And there's an SN11 in a high bay still being assembled. Like they make a bunch of them and tweaking and tuning and trying to fly as quickly and efficiently as possible to learn. They're really building rockets the way that the Americans used to in the 1960s, where they're bending metal and they're trying things. They're experimenting and doing the tests. Sometimes they break them and then they fly a different one. They're just doing it without killing anybody, at least so far.
Well, that's an upside.
Well, it's Elon Musk. The software is great, right? That's their strength, right? Same with the Tesla. Like the strength is in the software, the hardware. They're still, but they're trying to do something impossible. Like, and you realize how profound, if he succeeds, how profound this rocket is, right? That suddenly your cost of payload. So if you flew on the space shuttle back in the day, you were looking at $25,000 to $30,000 per kilo lifted to orbit. And an Atlas V, also in the $20,000 per kilo. Now, Falcon 9, SpaceX's rocket, radically changed things. It's down in the $2,000 a kilo range. So a tenfold decrease in costs. It's a huge step forward, but a relatively small rocket. But it's only partially reusable. That's one of the reasons they've lowered the cost as much as they have. When you get to 100% reusable vehicle, now you're talking more like an airliner, right? Where you land it, you do some maintenance, you refuel it, you fly it again. And so now you'd be talking about $2 a kilo, right? The cost of fuel for a vehicle like that is a few $100,000. It's just methane and liquid oxygen. So, one of the possibilities with Starship is that you don't send it to the stars at all, but that you use it as an expensive but fast way to travel around the Earth. You're pretty much, with a system like that, 45 minutes to any point in the planet you want to be. So if I want to come and visit you,
yeah, me too.
I'm going to spend longer getting to the airport than I would be for my flight to Stockholm. So that's what he's trying to do. I know we just want it to be true, but I don't know if it will be, but they're trying. It's an amazing experiment, and it's fun to watch, and he's doing it in a dramatic fashion. When SN8
still be learnings.
There always is, and there seems to be anyway. I think the expectation is they'll stick the landing on this one, and then they're ready to try the next thing. Now it needs to fly higher and faster, and that's the hard part about coming back from orbit is not the altitude, it's the speed, right? It's that you're moving so quickly, you have to shed all of that speed. And, just to make it more interesting, these rockets are made of stainless steel, not aluminum, not carbon fiber. They're stainless steel, which they look like a Buck Rogers rocket. They're kind of shiny in the sun. But the reason he went stainless steel is that stainless steel can handle the extreme cold of cryogenic fuel and also handle the heat. So he's still going to need a heat shield for reentry, but it can be much thinner, much lighter, and more likely to be able to be reused. So it's funny how retro it looks while also being absolutely on the leading edge of rocketry today.
And it makes you wonder what happened between the 60s and now. Where were the crazy people?
People got conservative. I mean, the first thing to remember is that the race to the moon was a political race. It was better than fighting World War III. Was to show who's superior, we're going to have this race instead of blowing each other up. I highly recommend it. But it also represents the scope of the expenditure was a wartime expenditure. So NASA's budget in the United States relative to the entire U.S. budget is about 0.5%. Now that's still billions of dollars. But during the space race in the 60s, it was 5%. Right? It was just they just spent a tremendous amount of money to prove their superiority over the Soviets. And so once they succeeded, they cut the money off, right? The budget went down to that 1.5%. And so the rate of evolution slowed down. There's more problems than that. That's only one aspect of it. But it's sort of acknowledge that sprint to the moon was a military mission for political purposes, right? Of the 12 humans that walked on the moon, all white men, 11 of them were military test pilots. One of them was a geologist, Jack Schmidt. And so just like, it was a military mission. That's what it was. And there was serious consideration after Apollo 8 when they flew around the moon. Let's stop there. We've now beaten the Soviets. Close enough. Oh, no, wait. Kennedy's dead. And he said we'd walk on the moon. So, okay, we should walk on the moon. Then Apollo 11 actually walks on the moon. There was like, we should stop. Right. But at that point, there was, because what they were doing was so insanely risky. There was so many ways for it to go wrong, and most of them weren't survivable. You know, that lunar excursion module, that thing that landed on the moon with 2 people in it, at best had oxygen and food and water for 3 days. And you were 3 days away from a rescue mission. Like there was just, if anything had gone wrong with that lunar lander in any way, if it had landed in a way that couldn't take off again, or if the launch mechanisms failed, they weren't going to survive, and they were going to die slow too, right? Like it was bad, and it's just like the risks aren't worth it. Once you've made the point, right? You've sort of achieved your goal. Stop, and so they wound it down, and they never spent that kind of money again. And so, you know, that then you throw in the sort of military industrial complex part. In the US side, at least, which is the way that they finance these kinds of projects is based on a cost plus financing strategy. And so what that means is, hey, we want you to achieve this goal, and we'll pay you this much to achieve it with some incentive. Well, they actually don't set the price. They say, this is the goal you got to reach. This is the time you got to reach it by. And you can add some margin in if you get it in on time, but it must work. And so there's no incentive to reduce costs. In fact, a strong incentive to not reduce costs. It's to minimize risk. Now, that strategy is pretty good if you're doing something completely original, right? The James Webb Space Telescope is a one-of-a-kind machine, and you're not going to build a bunch of them. And so you're going to spend a lot trying to build that one-of-a-kind thing. But once you got to a place where they were like flying supplies to the space station, that's a routine project and cost plus. That's why it's $20,000 a kilo. So instead, NASA wisely came up with the commercial space transport program, where they said, hey, this is how much mass we need lifted to the space station on a regular basis. Set a price, and we'll pay that price. And then you're incented to, you can make more money if you can spend less and still achieve that. And that's what SpaceX did, and how they got the price down to $2,000 a kilo. So that's what stalled the evolution of spaceflight for so long, and the shuttle too. I mean, the shuttle was too much technology that was too unreliable and too complicated. It never did what it was supposed to do, really, in the sense of being a rapidly reusable, low-cost access to space. It was stunningly expensive, and it stayed stunningly expensive. One could argue they just tried to go too far in too short a time, or that they didn't spend enough on it to make it more reusable and reliable. But it held back the American space program for a long time to not get to more efficient systems. The amount of money that the shuttle required to operate was so high that it just ate up their whole budget. And it wasn't safe.
Well, that's a big part of it, isn't it?
They lost 2 orbiters, and it's like, look, we've got more astronauts. We don't have more orbiters. And it's true. Astronauts are crazy. You can always find another crazy person who's going to get in your dangerous vehicle again. But orbiters are hard to come by, and they're extremely expensive. And they just cost so much to maintain. They essentially were dismantled after every flight and rebuilt. And it's just, it wasn't the reusable vehicle. Really, it was a rebuildable vehicle. And so, now again, if what Elon's developing here with Starship is a truly reusable vehicle where it does what aircraft do, which is it can fly multiple cycles with minimal maintenance, and after a certain amount of time, it needs a larger maintenance, and after a longer block of time, it needs another larger maintenance, and then eventually it's too old and you retire it. You know, and the airline behavior to spaceflight, that will be transformative. But,
you think we're going to have space flight in our lifetime? I mean,
well, yeah, we do.
Like commercial?
Well, and we do. So they just announced the Crew Dragon, which is on the Falcon 9, is now flying astronauts to the space station. Has just announced there's two different flights. One is a pure commercial flight, so it's 4 people, a couple of extra astronauts that are going to the space station, but are not in the employment of any government. But now the second one that was just announced, where there's a billionaire who has paid for the $200 million or so that it is to do a SpaceX Crew Dragon flight, and he's going to raffle off one of the seats to raise money for a hospital.
Cool.
So, you know, you don't have to be an astronaut to fly into space now. You just have to be lucky. So, yeah, we're there. That is now, and I don't know if you've seen the news, like Tom Cruise's production company has signed a deal to shoot a part of a film on the space station with Tom Cruise. So that's pretty commercial.
Why?
You're Tom Cruise and you can get away with it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, probably.
You know? I would.
Well, and so we are seeing the beginnings of a true commercial space initiative. It's still extremely expensive. It's still lottery-winningly expensive. But it is now a possibility to put a hotel into space. And as that commercial flow begins to crank up, we'll see the costs come down. But again, Starship may break the model. If the next few years Starship suddenly drops that price from $2,000 a kilo to $2 a kilo, well, then, yeah, any of us can do it. It's going to be a few more years. And in the meantime, I think we might build up some infrastructure. Just the same way, like, look, it's theoretically possible for you and I to go to Antarctica, right? We can do a cruise ship, but if you actually wanted to spend a week in Antarctica, it's not only stunningly expensive. Like, you got to jump through a bunch of hoops to make that happen. But it's possible, right? It's sort of that... we're in a few years away from that being possible for orbit, or for a week in a small space hotel to be the price of a house, right? It's like that kind of number, right? I think that's going to be in reach, right? First it'll be a lottery winning, then it'll be a house.
Are we going to buy a house or go to space?
Yeah, for a week, right? And
yeah, for a week. We still don't have a house to live in.
Yeah. But I got to go.
I remember 25 years ago. Yeah, well, there's that. How many people can say that? Mm-hmm. 25 years ago, when I was in school, I know we talked a lot about we will be able to go to the moon and vacation on Mars and stuff like that. And I was so scared because I literally thought that meant in 5 years.
Yeah,
I did not want to go.
Well, and you don't need to. There is still, it'll be interesting to see what the Biden administration does with the push for building a base on the moon. There are reasonable proposals to establish a research base on the moon, very much like Antarctica. That would be, operated by multiple countries. You would be there in shifts, only a certain amount of time. And there is some unique research to be done on the moon. It's distinctive to the moon. That it's not just, besides the fact that it's a logical stepping stone for our civilization to become a spacefaring civilization. The moon actually has a remarkable number of useful things on it, not the least of which being water. I think Jeff Bezos' sort of stated goal for Blue Origin was to move polluting industry off the Earth. So the same way that Elon's stated goal for SpaceX is to create a city on Mars, Bezos is to move polluting industry off the Earth. And the logical industry for him to develop is power, right? We can generate electricity from solar in orbit quite well. It's just not cost effective. But if we lower the cost to space, that helps. But what would help even more is to start manufacturing those solar panels on the moon. The moon has all this, the ingredients necessary. The manufacturing of solar panels is fairly toxic as well. But it's easy to send a solar panel back into geostationary orbit around the Earth from the moon than it is to send it from the Earth. So to develop industry sufficiently on the moon to do that, to move our power production comprehensively into geostationary orbit, that's a huge amount of pollutants removed from our lives while still having lots of electricity. It's very doable. It's just time and money and knowledge. We have to learn some things to get it done. But there's no showstoppers. You're gonna have to work through all the problems, and we'll learn a bunch of stuff along the way, without a doubt. It's next steps on evolving our civilization.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it makes more sense than Mars. Honestly,
Yeah.
you know, Mars is a long way away, and it's really not that hospitable. It doesn't have a lot in the way of useful resources. Like the resources that are useful on Mars, some of them are more plentiful on the moon than they are on Mars, and the moon's a heck of a lot closer. I did a talk not that long ago. It's only a short talk. I haven't done the full length one yet about colonizing Venus. In many respects, Venus is a better target than Mars. Now, you wouldn't land on the surface of Venus. It's a little hot. Actually, it's really, really, really hot. But at about 70 kilometers off the surface of Venus, you're above the sulfuric clouds, but you have one atmosphere of pressure. So your normal sea level air pressure at that altitude. You have about a third more solar than we have around the Earth, because you're actually closer to the sun when you're in Venus. The air is not breathable, but that's not a surprise. And the density of the air is quite high. So we could build habitats, big mylar spheres, or Kevlar, Teflon spheres that could have whole cities inside of them that are not pressurized. They're just filled with breathable air. And they will float.
Interesting.
Because they're not pressurized, if you puncture them, some air is going to leak out, but it's not going to come rushing out, right? It's not a decompression thing. You can sew it back up and seal the hole. You can coat the top of them with solar panels, and they'll generate plenty of electricity. And what's actually in that air is carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, some sulfides, some hydrogen. So pretty much everything you need to survive, you can suck directly out of the atmosphere of Venus. And in fact, because it's in a gaseous form, it's easier to refractorate. You just cool it down, it'll naturally separate into its component elements. A little bit of chemistry, you have breathable air, you can actually make food, easier than you can on Mars. Mars is, they're flying their first mission now to actually try and make oxygen on the surface of Mars, which is cool. They're going to extract it from the carbon dioxide. But in some ways, Venus would be easier to work on in that respect. So if you really want to expand our civilization, move it to different locations, cloud cities on Venus. It's absolutely feasible.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
They're
both Venus and Mars are on the periphery of what they call the Goldilocks zone. That's sort of the area between which liquid water would exist. There's evidence that all three of these planets had liquid water on them at one time on ours. We still do, but various things have happened along the way that have tied up that water on both Mars and Venus. But they're cautionary tales to us about messing with your environment. Clearly things have gone wrong there, but it does mean, there's possibilities for humanity spreading to those things.
So we might live in a cloud city on Venus.
Yeah.
Why not?
No, I'm fine here.
This,
I still don't want to go to space.
No, I think if you're a teenager right now, and I do a version of this talk for like middle schoolers, it's possible you might do that as an adult. But more likely it'll be your kids or their grandkids. But there's this, humans expand, right? We always need a certain group of us, the crazy ones, exploring our horizon, and a sense that our civilization is still advancing, that it can do more, and it's an exciting time. The stuff that Elon's doing, and Jeff Bezos is doing. It's interesting that it's tech billionaires that are doing it these days. to press against the edges of what our civilization can do.
Yeah. I like it.
Will you go?
Not without you.
Oh, too bad. I'm afraid of heights.
Yeah, this is some serious heights we're talking about. Well, and Stacy's in the same boat as you, Jess. She's like, no, thanks. But I might be able to talk her into a week in orbit if we could afford it. You know, if the price is right. I mean, that would be an interesting experience. That's enough for me. I don't really need to go to another planet. Or vacation on the moon. That'd be cool. But I'm not going to immigrate. You know, I'm in my 50s now. I'm not ready to be a colonist on a new world. I'm kind of comfortable with what I've got here.
So for those who doesn't know, the Tesla has a built-in fart machine. So I gotta talk about this. So it has, you can actually push the seats has individual speakers in them. So you can press on a panel, and then the individual seat will make a fart noise. So I imagine Elon Musk sitting in a meeting saying, we need a big subwoofer
in each seat.
And that's how the space program was born.
Nice.
Yeah, Jimmy's convinced that Elon was building the fart machine first. And then how do we wrap this? Let's say a car.
We need some kind of seat. What has seats? Cars have seats.
Well, I mean, the car business made him one of the wealthiest humans in the world, right?
Yeah.
Tesla's stock price is insane by anybody's standard. But, people are pretty anticipatory. And I'm keeping an eye on SN9 because they're doing propellant loading right now. So this thing may fly in the immediate future. So
nice.
Yeah, it's gonna be exciting. If it can actually stick the landing, that's a big deal. It'll be another step towards this future we're talking about.
Yeah.
Exciting
times.
If the Starship can work the way that they plan, it's 100 metric tons to low Earth orbit, which is a lot. I'd say that would make it one of the heaviest lift vehicles ever made, capable of transporting a tremendous number of people if necessary. And of course, his goal is to actually move 1 million people to Mars in his lifetime, which that means a lot of rockets flying routinely back and forth. And there's no fast flights to Mars, right? Quickest trip there is about 4 months. And that's only in the right window.
You were talking about a
2 years.
weekend?
Yeah.
It's a weekend, but it will take you like a year.
No, you can do a weekend on the moon, although it's 3 days each way. So,
So a weekend is a week.
Yeah, at least a week. And I hate it when my travel time is longer than my actual destination time. Right?
Yeah.
So, it's a 14-day day and a 14-day night on the moon. So when they were talking about putting astronauts on the moon for a long duration, they were typically talking in the sort of 40-day range. So you have a day cycle, a night cycle, another day cycle, and then you leave. So that would be.
So you want to spend 3 days on the moon?
Or do you want to spend a month and a half on the moon? I think it's a little more realistic if we're going that far. Although, I don't know what you do for that long. That's a long time, right? Like I can't sit on a beach that long. You're lucky if I get a week on the beach before I'm like, I gotta go do something. Like I'm good.
Yeah, I'm more of a couple of hours and then I'm out.
Yeah.
I really love the beach, but my skin does not handle sun well.
You have the complexion of a vampire.
So it's like, it's the sun, 10, 9, 8. Now we got to go.
True story.
No, you like the beach just at night.
Yeah.
Much safer.
But it's not as warm, so
no.
There's that.
Yeah, definitely windy.
Just have to put on a lot of sunscreen.
That's true.
Well, I am going to look hard at the Polestar 2. which is an electric car from your part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And Tesla has certainly been innovative, their battery technology and so forth, but there's lots of complaints about the quality of the car builds, that they're still learning to manufacture cars well, that the technology is one thing. So it's cool to me to see, BMW and Volkswagen, and really it's Volvo, but Polestar, and even Ford starting to make real electric cars, and not just compliance cars, not just to keep California happy, but to build platform electric cars. I think that's going to be a real transformative product.
I wasn't super impressed with the Model 3 that we test drove. But hey.
Was it a quality thing?
Well, it was a super bumpy ride. We had some snow slush on the roads, and just a couple of days before, we test drove the Volkswagen ID3, and we felt nothing. Yeah, it was super smooth ride, not an issue. And we were, I think we were in the long range, fancy, jacked up Model 3.
I think both of them were fancy ones.
Yeah. Of course, they're not going to show us the crappy one.
Yeah, they're always going to show the high-end model, whether you can afford it or not. But I mean, let's face it, Volkswagen's been making cars for a long time. So if they're taking the electric platform seriously, you can expect it to be a pretty good car. Well made. And the same for Polestar is a new brand, but that's Volvo. Those guys know how to make cars. You've got to give them their consideration and the quality of the vehicle. Over the American side, people saying nice things about the Mach-E from Ford, but also the fact that Ford's F-150, which is like the best-selling truck in the world, and they're actually going to make an electric version of that. Like, to take a brand that's that precious to them and bring this new platform to it, it just speaks to me that the existing car manufacturers are taking electric cars seriously now.
Yeah.
It's a real thing. And 2020 was the year that lithium-ion battery packs at the car scale went down below $100 per kilowatt hour. And that was supposed to be the magic number. Again, 2010, 10 years before, it was over $1,000 per kilowatt hour. And now it's under 100. And so that's the sort of the point where the batteries are no longer the most expensive piece in the car. Like, now you should get a parity vehicle, whether it's a gas-propelled vehicle or an electric-propelled vehicle. But it's going to take a couple of years, even though we sort of hit that price in 2020, it's going to take a couple of years in the manufacturing pipeline for that to sort of show up.
It's still much more expensive with electric, I'd say.
Well, but the ID3 is more or less a Golf, right? Like, it's that form factor.
It's their new. They're just it's the same. They're rebranding all of their cars to ID3, 4, 5, whatever.
Yeah, so they're not really branded at all, right? I hate these numbering systems. It doesn't mean we're
I'm fine with them. It's numbers.
Yeah.
I do well with numbers.
You get one digit off and you get a totally different vehicle. It's not even close.
Yeah, I'm fine with ID4 as well. I'm fine with that.
It's also interesting to me. I mean, Volkswagen after Dieselgate, that whole, talk about.
They have some making up to do.
Yeah. And so, it's great that they're embracing that. They need a sort of rebranding. Although it's interesting, like, Dieselgate was a software thing. Like, that, the thing that got me about that whole thing was, in the end, a developer wrote some code to conceal the emissions of that vehicle. Now, and I got questions for that developer. I hope they were ultimately the whistleblower and the reason it leaked out. It's more disturbing still that it made it through the pipeline, that management accepted that and shipped it for years. But, you talk about the ethics of software development. It's like, you wrote this code, like, to conceal the truth. Like, how do you look yourself in the mirror, man? Like, come on.
Yeah.
And we're really coming up to this point where software is running this planet, and we kind of need to be a profession. We're asking us to be. We're asked to be good, but we don't have a profession backing us that requires us to be good. The way that the doctors do. right? Where you have a medical board that certifies you as a doctor and takes responsibility for you when you behave inappropriately, or law, or any other engineering discipline for that matter. You know, engineers are beholden to the engineering committee. Ultimately, they're not going to build your bridge the way you want to. They're going to build it the way that's right. Software is still not like that, and I'm wondering how much longer we can keep avoiding, you know, becoming a profession we kind of need to be, considering we're running a lot of this planet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is true.
All right. The clock is 9.
It is.
It is
Oh my
9.
goodness.
It's been a blast.
How did we get so late? And
don't
SN9
know.
is counting down, but not flying yet. So are we?
Okay, we still have time to catch it.
Yeah, you can catch it. Are we done, friends?
Yeah.
We are. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, fun to chat.
Been a blast.
And, yeah, I miss you guys a lot. I'm looking forward to us all being able to get together again.
Us too.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe
Right.
on Saturn.
Venus.
Venus.
Yeah, Saturn's a bit far. And
Yeah.
although if there's a moon around Saturn called Titan, and it's actually, that moon is larger than the planet Mercury. It just happens to be orbiting Saturn. And the atmosphere there is mostly ethane and methane. It's extremely cold, but the gravity is low and the pressure is high. If you could stay warm, like wear a coat, you should be able to flap your arms with some wings on them and fly yourself on Titan. And there are lakes of liquid ethane there, so it's a cool place. The ice, there's water ice, frozen solid. So we would mine for ice to get oxygen. But yeah, you could float around that thick atmosphere of Titan. It would be a good trip. Take a while though. I mean, the fastest we've gotten to Saturn so far, I think, is 4 years. Yeah, 4 or 5 years. So it's a bit of a haul.
That's,
you know, bring
that's
a book.
a trip.
Yeah.
One book.
Matthias says, so miss seeing you all in person.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah,
Been
miss you
so
all.
long.
We'll do it. And this too shall pass, friends. This too shall pass.
Yes, definitely. And until then, have a good night or day, wherever you are.
Yep. Bye.